I was seriously ill. Instead of helping, my husband left for Europe with his family for 74 days. He hid my medication, cut off the power and water, locking me inside our home to die. But upon his return, when he opened the front door, he suddenly turned pale. I am Serena, 34. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most. I lay pressed against the hardwood floor, fingers clawing the Persian rug. Breathing felt like inhaling crushed glass. My rare autoimmune disease had flared up, paralyzing my legs, sending shockwaves of agony through my chest. The room spun. Through my blurred vision, I saw a designer loafer step over my trembling hand. I looked up. My husband Marcus stood there in a tailored navy suit. He did not kneel. He did not call an ambulance. Instead, he casually adjusted his silver cufflinks, looking down at me with mild annoyance, as if I were a stain on the floorboards rather than his wife fighting for her life. Marcus! I wheezed the word, barely scraping past my throat. The pills, top shelf. He sighed an exaggerated sound of inconvenience and checked his gold watch. Serena, your timing is pathetic. We are leaving for the airport in 20 minutes. My mother has been talking about this luxury tour to everyone at the Buckhead megachurch for 6 months. I am not letting your health drama ruin our 74 days in Paris and Rome. I tried dragging my body toward the kitchen island, gasping, "Please, I cannot breathe." The front door opened. His sister Tasha walked in, dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase. She glanced at me struggling on the floor, rolled her eyes, and stepped over my legs to grab sparkling water from the fridge. "Is she doing this on purpose?" Tasha asked, popping the cap. "Bradley is waiting in the driveway. Mom is already complaining about the heat. Tell her to get up, Marcus. She is embarrassing us." "She is just trying to guilt trip us because she was not invited," Marcus said. He walked over to the kitchen cabinet. My heart hammered with a desperate spark of hope. The medication was there. He reached up, fingers brushing against the orange prescription bottle. I watched him pull it down. He did not walk to me. He looked at the label, looked at me, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. He walked to the kitchen sink, unscrewed the cap, and dumped the entire contents down the drain. He flipped the garbage disposal switch, the loud grinding noise drowning out my muffled scream. "Oops," Marcus said, tossing the empty plastic bottle into the trash can. "Looks like you are out. You should really learn to manage your prescriptions better, Serena. It is incredibly irresponsible." "Why?" I choked out, tears of pain and disbelief streaming down my face. "Because you are a weight around my neck," he whispered, crouching down. "You contribute nothing. You sit in this house while I build an empire. Do not worry, just sleep it off. You will be fine, or you will not. Either way, I will be in Monaco." He stood back up, straightening his tie. "Tasha, get the bags. I need to secure the house." As Tasha walked out without a second glance, Marcus went to the utility closet. I heard the metallic clanks of the main breaker switches being violently pulled down. The refrigerator died. The air conditioning stopped. The house plunged into a suffocating silence. He was cutting the power. A moment later, I heard the squeak of the main water valve turning off. He was cutting off my survival supply. No water, no electricity, no medication. I was leaving a paralyzed woman in a sealed house for 2 months during the sweltering Georgia summer. Marcus walked back to the front door, pausing on the threshold. The sunlight cast a dark shadow over his face. He looked at my helpless form one last time. "Goodbye, Serena. Enjoy the silence." The heavy door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I heard the exterior security gate lock and gauge. Outside, the engine of his SUV roared to life, tires crunching against the gravel driveway before fading away into the distance. Silence settled over the sweltering house. I lay there for 3 minutes, taking shallow breaths. Then the sound of the vehicle completely disappeared. My gasping stopped. The tears dried on my cheeks. The panicked expression on my face dissolved into a cold, terrifying calm. I pushed myself up from the floor, the paralysis in my legs miraculously vanishing. I dusted off the front of my silk blouse, rolling my shoulders to release the tension of the performance I had just delivered. I walked over to the sofa, reached underneath the upholstery, and peeled back a strip of duct tape. I pulled out a sealed plastic bag containing my actual emergency medication. I swallowed the pill dry. Next, I walked over to the Persian rug where I had just been lying. I kicked it aside, revealing a hidden floorboard panel. I popped it open and pulled out a fully charged encrypted satellite phone, along with a secondary untraceable laptop. Marcus thought he was leaving a helpless housewife to wither away so he could inherit my assets. He thought I was just a boring woman reading magazines. He had no idea that for the past 10 years, I had been operating under an alias as a top-tier forensic auditor for federal agencies, specializing in tracking international wire fraud and dismantling criminal syndicates. I booted up the satellite phone, watching the encrypted network connect. A grim smile touched my lips as I listened to the absolute silence of the house. They really forgot who they married. Let the 74 days begin. I dialed a secured number I had not used in years. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. It was Agent David Vance, my former task force handler. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I gave him my clearance code and explained my situation. I told him my husband had locked me in a house without power, water, or medication. I needed a discreet medical extraction immediately. No sirens, no local police. I needed to vanish so the men who tried to kill me would believe their plan worked perfectly. David did not ask unnecessary questions. He told me a medical transport would be at my back door in 12 minutes. I used those 12 minutes to pack a black duffel bag and erase any physical trace that I survived. I made sure the floor looked exactly as it did when Marcus left. When the unmarked van arrived in the alleyway, 2 medics bypassed the electronic gate using my codes. They carried me out on a stretcher, locking the deadbolt behind us, sealing the tomb my husband had built for me. By sunset, I was lying in a secure private recovery room at a federal medical facility. An intravenous drip pumped steroids and hydration back into my veins. The agonizing tightness in my chest was finally fading, but I was not resting. Propped up against the sterile white pillows, I flipped open my encrypted laptop. The bright screen illuminated my face. Marcus was an arrogant man, and arrogant men make sloppy mistakes. He believed his digital footprint was secure because he bought expensive firewall software. He did not realize I was the one who had quietly configured our home network years ago. I bypassed his primary passwords in less than 4 minutes. I tunneled directly into his private desktop server, sifting through his hidden financial folders with surgical precision. I was looking for the real motive. Marcus was greedy, but leaving his wife to die in a sweltering house required a massive life-changing incentive. I found the answer buried inside a folder, deceptively labeled as client tax documents. It was a scanned PDF of a life insurance policy. My eyes scanned the black and white text. My heart turned to absolute ice. Marcus had taken out a massive life insurance policy on me just 3 months ago. The payout upon my death was a staggering $10 million. I zoomed in on the final page of the document. There, sitting perfectly on the signature line, was my name. He had meticulously forged my signature. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with terrifying clarity. This was never just about him being tired of my illness or wanting a long vacation. This was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. The 74-day European luxury tour was not just a vacation for his family, it was his ironclad alibi. He needed to be out of the country, surrounded by dozens of witnesses in Paris, Rome, and Milan, while I supposedly passed away from natural causes due to my existing autoimmune disease. He had planned to return to Atlanta, break down the door in tears, play the devastated grieving widow for the local news cameras, and quietly collect $10 million from the insurance company. I thought he had executed the perfect crime. I minimized the insurance document and opened a custom terminal on my laptop. When Marcus cut the power and water to our home, he assumed he had blinded the house completely. He did not know that 3 years ago I had installed microscopic military-grade security cameras in the living room, dining room, and his home office. These cameras did not run on the house electricity or the standard wireless internet. They operated on an independent, battery-backed cellular mesh network designed for federal surveillance. I pulled up the cloud storage interface and scrubbed through the audio and video logs from the night before they left. The footage loaded. The screen showed Marcus sitting in his leather armchair, pouring a glass of expensive scotch. Sitting across from him was Bradley, my sister-in-law, Tasha's husband. Bradley was a man who reeked of unearned superiority, constantly bragging about his financial genius while secretly draining his wife's bank accounts. I turned up the volume on my laptop. The audio was crystal clear. "Are you sure the policy is locked in?" Bradley asked, taking a sip of his drink. "Because if this falls apart, those crypto guys are going to break my legs." Marcus laughed, a dark, arrogant sound that made my stomach churn. "Relax, Bradley. The ink is dry. The company processed the underwriting last week. We leave tomorrow and nature takes its course. It is completely foolproof." Bradley leaned back on the sofa, a greedy grin spreading across his face. "Thank God. Once she croaks, that 10 million covers my crypto debt and gets us that coastal villa in Monaco. No more Atlanta traffic. No more pretending to care about her medical bills." "Exactly," Marcus said, raising his glass in a toast, "to a very profitable tragedy." The clink of their crystal glasses echoed through my quiet hospital room. I paused the video right on their smiling faces. The sheer audacity of their conversation was breathtaking. They had sat in the living room I decorated, drinking the scotch I bought, casually discussing how they would spend the money they earned by murdering me. They felt so untouchable, so incredibly safe in their privilege and their arrogance. I slowly closed the video player. I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow or heartbreak. I only felt a cold, calculating surge of adrenaline rushing through my veins. Marcus wanted to play a high-stakes game with my life. He wanted to steal $10 million and live like a king in Europe. I reached for my keyboard, bringing up the master list of his international bank accounts. I smiled. The game is on. My fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating a secured connection to the cellular mesh network running my home security cameras. I needed to act fast. Marcus was a creature of habit, and his flight to Paris was scheduled to land in exactly 4 hours. Once he settled into his first-class suite, his very first move would be to check the living room feed to confirm my demise. I could not let him see an empty hardwood floor. I opened a specialized video editing software I had used during my time with the Federal Task Force. Taking the raw footage from the moment right after he locked me inside, I isolated my collapsed body on the Persian rug. With a few precise keystrokes, I manipulated the thermal signature data within the video file. I dropped my digital body temperature to a cold, lifeless room temperature. I removed the slight rise and fall of my chest, rendering the image completely still. I set this altered, frozen frame on a continuous seamless loop and uploaded it directly to the camera local cache. When Marcus logged in from France, he would not see a live feed. He would see a flawless high-definition broadcast of exactly what he wanted to see: a dead wife. I kept my monitoring software open in a secondary window and leaned back against the hospital pillows. The sterile room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. My physical strength was returning, fueled by the aggressive medical cocktail in my veins and the burning desire for absolute justice. 4 hours later, a notification pinged on my screen. An external address routing through a Parisian internet service provider was attempting to access my living room camera. Marcus had arrived. I watched the system logs as his device connected, downloaded the looped video feed, and disconnected 3 minutes later. He had stared at my digital corpse for 3 whole minutes, likely sipping complimentary champagne, verifying that his $10 million problem was permanently solved. A moment later, my secondary screen lit up. I had mirrored Marcus' phone to a virtual machine on my laptop months ago when I first suspected he was hiding assets. A new message popped up in his family group chat. The chat included Marcus, his mother Vivian, his sister Tasha, and his brother-in-law Bradley. The text from Marcus read, "Just check the cameras at home. The baggage is officially taken care of. Flights and hotels for the rest of the trip are fully covered. Drinks on me tonight at the hotel bar. We celebrate our new beginning." Vivian replied almost instantly, "God is so good to us. I knew the Lord would remove any obstacles from your path, my son. We deserve this blessing." Tasha followed up quickly. "Finally. Make sure we book that private yacht in Monaco next week. I am not flying economy on the way back either." Reading their messages did not hurt. It only sharpened my focus. They were actively celebrating my murder, framing it as a divine blessing. I cracked my knuckles and opened a new terminal window. It was time to find out exactly how Marcus was funding this lavish 74-day European excursion. The life insurance policy would not pay out until he returned to the United States and filed a death certificate. He needed massive upfront capital to pay for first-class flights, five-star hotels, and designer shopping sprees for four greedy adults. I bypassed the two-factor authentication on his primary corporate account at the Atlanta investment firm, where he served as vice president. I pulled up the master ledger and began a deep forensic audit of his recent transactions. I traced the flow of capital through a labyrinth of shell companies' dummy accounts and fabricated vendor invoices. Marcus was arrogant, but his accounting skills were embarrassingly basic compared to a federal auditor. Within 45 minutes, I found the bleeding artery. Marcus had systematically siphoned funds from three high-yield client portfolios over the last 6 months. He had routed the stolen money through an offshore holding company registered in the Cayman Islands, then funneled it directly into his personal checking account. The total amount embezzled was a staggering $5 million. He had stolen from his own clients to finance his alibi. I sat staring at the glowing numbers on my screen. The sheer scale of his stupidity was breathtaking. Marcus had not just committed insurance fraud and attempted murder. He had committed massive corporate embezzlement. My initial instinct was to hit the kill switch. I could freeze his credit cards right now. I could lock him out of his account, strand him in Paris, and let him panic. But I paused, my hand hovering over the keyboard. I thought about the federal statutes I had memorized during my career. If I froze his accounts now, he would face domestic embezzlement charges in Georgia. He would hire expensive lawyers, claim it was a clerical error, and try to negotiate a plea deal. I wanted him destroyed, not just penalized. I wanted the kind of destruction that leaves a permanent, inescapable crater. I looked at the transaction logs. Every time Marcus swiped his card in Europe using those stolen funds, he was crossing an international border. I was moving illicit money through foreign banking systems. In the eyes of the federal government, this elevated his crime from simple corporate theft to federal international wire fraud. It was a charge that carried mandatory severe minimum sentencing and brought down the full crushing weight of the federal authorities. I smiled, the cold blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. I closed the freezing protocol and let the accounts remain fully active. Let them shop. Let them drink expensive champagne. Let Tasha book her luxury yacht in Monaco. Let Bradley buy his designer watches. I wanted them to spend every single cent of that stolen $5 million across as many European borders as possible. Every swipe of his card was another nail in his coffin. Every luxury purchase was another federal charge added to his inevitable indictment. They thought they were living the dream, but they were actually building their own prison. I leaned back and closed my laptop, letting the silence of the hospital room wash over me. The trap was set. All I had to do now was watch them happily walk right into it. The following morning brought a wave of digital notifications. My specialized tracking software pinged loudly across the sterile quiet of my recovery room. I sat up and adjusted the intravenous line taped to my wrist, pulling the laptop onto my lap. The alert was not from Marcus's banking accounts. It was a social media trigger I had set up for Vivian. My mother-in-law was broadcasting live to her congregation in Atlanta. I clicked the link and watched the feed load on my screen. Vivian was standing on the teak deck of a luxury yacht. The turquoise waters of the French Riviera stretched out behind her. She wore a designer sun hat and diamond-encrusted sunglasses. She held a flute of sparkling wine in one hand, gesturing wildly at the camera. "Good morning to my church family," Vivian shouted over the gentle ocean breeze. "I had to go live and show you how the Lord blesses those in his righteous path. Look at this vessel, we are sailing the Mediterranean Sea today. My son Marcus has treated us to a life of absolute favor. God is so good." She spun the camera around to show Tasha and Bradley lounging on white leather cushions being served expensive caviar by a uniformed crew member. Tasha waved lazily at the camera. Vivian turned the lens back to her arrogant face. "You know, physical weakness is a reflection of spiritual weakness. Some people are just too fragile, ungrateful, and spiritually poor to enjoy the blessings of this world. They stay stuck in sickbeds because they lack the faith to rise up. But our family is thriving. We leave the dead weight behind and elevate. Her vicious attack on my illness made my jaw clench. She was mocking the woman her son supposedly left to die 48 hours ago. She wanted the applause and envy of her entire congregation, desperately needing to be seen as the ultimate matriarch of high society. "Enjoy the view, Vivian," I whispered to the screen. "Let us see exactly who paid for it." I minimized the social media window and opened my auditing program. A yacht of that magnitude in the French Riviera did not come cheap. I ran a quick search through Marcus's monitored corporate accounts, expecting to see a massive deduction for the rental fee. The transaction was not there. I frowned, my fingers flying across the keyboard. If he did not use his embezzled corporate funds, where did the money come from? I initiated a broader search, scanning for large wire transfers associated with Vivian's financial profiles. 3 minutes later, the system caught a hit. A wire transfer of $150,000 had been authorized 2 days prior, sent directly to a marine charter company in Monaco. I isolated the routing numbers of the origin account. My eyes widened as the bank details populated on my screen. The money did not come from Marcus. It did not come from Vivian's personal checking. It came from a commercial nonprofit account registered to Buckhead Grace Cathedral. Vivian was the senior treasurer of the church's outreach board. Marcus used his financial background to help her manage the funds. Together, they bypassed authorization protocols. Marcus executed the wire transfer, draining $150,000 straight from the church's charity fund. They stole the congregation's tithes, the money meant for the homeless shelter, to pay for their yacht rental. The depravity of their greed was almost difficult to comprehend. They were not just stealing from a faceless corporate investment firm. They were robbing the people Vivian was currently bragging to on her live stream. I compiled the wire transfer receipts, fraudulent digital signature logs, and specific IP addresses showing the transaction originating from Marcus's device. I packaged these documents into a forensic dossier. Using an encrypted email server that bounced my location across 3 continents, I drafted a message detailing the theft. I sent the email directly to the church's board of directors and the executive pastoral staff. I carbon copied investigative reporters at 3 local news stations in Atlanta. I attached the link to Vivian's ongoing Facebook broadcast, providing them with real-time evidence of where their stolen charity money was floating. I switched my screen back to the live stream. Vivian was still talking, holding her phone high to capture the ocean breeze in her hair. She was oblivious to the digital bomb I had just detonated in her hometown. "Remember, saints, you have to sow a seed to reap a harvest," Vivian preached into the camera, taking another sip of her wine. "When you give to the Lord, He gives back tenfold. Just look at this yacht." Suddenly, the comment section on the right side of the screen began to change. The steady stream of heart emojis and praising words abruptly halted. A new comment popped up from a senior deacon. "Where did you get the money for this boat, Vivian?" Then another comment appeared from a fellow church board member. "We just saw the wire transfer receipts. You stole the community shelter funds." Within seconds, the chat was a waterfall of absolute fury. Hundreds of members realized they were watching a live broadcast of a woman parading on a boat paid for by their hard-earned donations. "Thief! You stole from the church. Give us our tithe money back." Vivian stopped smiling. She squinted at the screen, her fingers struggling to scroll through the vicious comments. The color drained from her face. Her arrogant posture crumbled as panic set in. She looked wildly off camera toward Marcus, her mouth opening to speak, but no words came out. A loud, jarring ringtone pierced the audio of the live stream. Vivian looked down at her second phone resting on the teak table. The caller ID flashed brightly enough for the camera to catch it. It was the furious head pastor of Buckhead Grace Cathedral. I watched the live stream abruptly cut to black as Vivian scrambled to answer her ringing phone. The absolute panic in her eyes was a delicious appetizer, but I was already moving on to the main course. My laptop screen reflected in the dim lighting of my quiet hospital room as I toggled over to my secondary monitoring software. Vivian and Marcus were currently dealing with the explosive fallout of their stolen church funds. That situation left my arrogant brother-in-law Bradley completely unsupervised in the heart of Paris. Bradley was a man who walked through the world with an unearned sense of absolute superiority. He constantly belittled my career, mocking my modest salary, while loudly bragging about his supposed genius in cryptocurrency trading. What he never shared with the family was that his digital portfolio was built entirely on a foundation of massive illegal leverage. I opened a specialized tracking program and located Bradley's mobile device signal. He had separated from Vivian and Tasha for the evening. The tracking coordinates placed him directly inside an exclusive, outrageously expensive Parisian nightclub. I tapped into the club's unsecured public wireless network and easily accessed their internal security camera video feeds. The high-definition video quickly loaded on my computer screen. I immediately spotted Bradley sitting in a plush velvet booth. He was wearing a gaudy silk shirt, surrounded by a group of local models who were clearly only interested in free drinks. Bradley was putting on a pathetic show. He was waving his arms aggressively, pointing to the glowing financial graphs on his smartphone screen, desperately trying to impress the women with his fictional wealth. He signaled a waiter and arrogantly held up two fingers, pointing toward a display of vintage champagne. He was ordering bottles that cost thousands of dollars each, fully believing he was an untouchable titan of modern finance. He was spending money he did not actually have, relying completely on margin accounts he had opened illegally. A year ago, Bradley needed more capital to cover a series of disastrous trading losses. His personal credit was completely ruined. So he crept into my home office during a family dinner, stole my social security number from a filed tax return, and used my clean financial profile to open highly leveraged accounts on an international exchange. He thought I would never find out. He thought I was just a clueless housewife who did not understand decentralized finance. He was incredibly wrong. I had discovered the identity theft within 48 hours. But as a forensic auditor, I knew that interrupting a crime too early only results in a slap on the wrist. I needed him to dig a hole so deep he could never climb back out. I had let him trade on my identity for a full year, watching his reckless margin debt balloon to catastrophic levels. Tonight, the digging stopped. Tonight, I was burying him. I opened a secure direct portal to the enforcement division of the cryptocurrency exchange. I uploaded a meticulously prepared legal dossier containing irrefutable proof of his identity theft. I provided his digital addresses, device routing numbers, and the exact timestamps of when he opened the fraudulent accounts using my stolen credentials. I formally exercised my legal right as the victim of identity fraud to lock the compromised portfolio and initiate an immediate forced liquidation of all associated assets. I hit the enter key. The execution was instantaneous. On the live security feed, I watched Bradley laughing loudly, leaning back against the comfortable cushions of his booth. A cocktail waitress approached his luxury table, carrying a silver tray adorned with bright sparklers. Two massive bottles of vintage champagne sat on the tray. The total bill would easily exceed $10,000. The waitress presented the leather checkbook to Bradley. He did not even look at the total amount due. He just smirked, pulled a sleek metal credit card from his wallet, and tossed it onto the tray with a flick of his wrist. I switched my screen back to the crypto exchange terminal. The automated liquidation sequence was running at lightning speed. The system violently sold off his highly leveraged positions to cover the fraudulent margin calls. Because the digital market was currently experiencing a severe downturn, the forced sale triggered a cascading chain of catastrophic financial losses. Within 30 seconds, his entire digital fortune was wiped out completely. I watched the security feed again. The waitress walked back to the booth. She was not smiling anymore. She leaned down and whispered something into his ear. He frowned, snatching the card back from her hand. He pulled out a different card and handed it to her, his face flushing with visible irritation. 2 minutes later, the waitress returned. This time, she was accompanied by the formidable club manager and two massive security guards. The manager held both of his credit cards. He shook his head, speaking sharply to Bradley. His cards were violently declined. Every single bank account tied to that crypto exchange had been frozen by federal anti-fraud protocols. Bradley jumped up from his seat, his face turning bright red. He started yelling at the manager, pointing his finger aggressively, demanding they run the cards again. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, intending to show them his massive digital portfolio to prove his wealth. I watched the exact moment his world completely shattered. He unlocked his phone and opened his trading application. Instead of seeing a balance of mins, a bright red notification splashed across his screen. The alert stated that his portfolio had been seized by federal authorities due to verified identity theft and severe margin default. The system had liquidated his assets at a massive loss. The screen displayed his new inescapable reality. The balance was not zero. He was currently $2 million in debt. He dropped his phone. The device clattered against the nightclub floor. He stared blankly ahead. The game had truly just begun now. While Bradley was experiencing the total collapse of his financial existence in a Parisian nightclub, the rest of the family was dealing with their own immediate crisis, back at their luxury hotel. My security alerts intercepted a frantic string of text messages. Vivian was having a complete meltdown. The head pastor had just informed her that local police were launching an inquiry into the missing charity funds. She demanded to know how the congregation found out about the wire transfer. Marcus quickly jumped in to perform damage control. He typed a reassuring message to his mother and sister. He told them to ignore the noise back home. He insisted the church board was just confused about a clerical error and promised to clear it up upon their return. To calm their rising panic, he reminded them that they were untouchable. He bragged that his corporate accounts were overflowing with capital. He promised to take them on a massive shopping spree down the Champs-Élysées the very next morning to soothe their frayed nerves. He believed his stolen $5 million would be an endless safety net. I closed the messaging application and shifted my focus back to the physical assets he loved to brag about. Marcus possessed an insatiable need to project wealth. His ultimate trophy was our sprawling mansion in the prestigious Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta. At dinner parties, he would proudly announce to his colleagues how he built that estate from the ground up to provide for his dependent wife. He loved walking guests through the grand foyer, boasting about the imported marble, claiming it was the crown jewel of his financial empire. The truth was completely different. The mansion was not his. I pulled up the county property records on my encrypted laptop. The digital deed loaded instantly on my screen. I had legally purchased the massive plot of land under my maiden name 2 entire years before I even met Marcus. The core equity belonged exclusively to me. However, during my forensic audit of his hidden folders earlier, I uncovered another layer of his criminal greed. Marcus had secretly taken out a massive, fraudulent second mortgage on the property. He forged my signature on bank documents to secure a highly leveraged loan, using my equity to fund his flashy lifestyle. I thought the house was his personal piggy bank. He thought he would return from Europe, collect my life insurance policy, pay off the fraudulent mortgage, and continue hosting his lavish parties. It was time to pull the rug out from under his polished leather shoes. I contacted a highly aggressive commercial real estate developer I had investigated years ago. This developer specialized in aggressively purchasing distressed properties with cold hard cash. I knew he had been trying to acquire prime real estate in the Buckhead area for a massive new corporate zoning project. I sent him a direct message containing the legal deed, the clean title history, proving my sole ownership, and a highly lucrative offer. I proposed a rapid off-market cash sale of the entire estate. Because I held the original title prior to the marriage and possessed undeniable proof that the second mortgage was obtained through documented federal fraud, I had the absolute legal authority to liquidate the asset immediately. I offered the developer a steep discount in exchange for extreme speed and absolute discretion. His legal team reviewed my documentation within the hour. They recognized an ironclad deal when they saw one. By late afternoon, we had negotiated a final sale price of exactly $4 million in pure cash. The money was wired directly into a secure, untraceable offshore trust account I had established under my operational alias. Marcus had no access to it. The house he loved to brag about was officially gone. He no longer owned the marble floors or the grand foyer. I was essentially homeless, and he was completely oblivious to the fact. But simply selling the property was not enough for me. I wanted to ensure that when he eventually returned to Atlanta, There would be absolutely nothing left of the life he thought he had built. I needed to shatter his ego into a million unrecoverable pieces. Before I signed the final transfer documents, I stipulated a bizarre non-negotiable condition in the sale contract. The new corporate owners were required to take physical possession of the property immediately. Furthermore, I legally mandated that they must begin aggressive commercial renovations without a single day of delay. They had to completely gut the interior of the mansion and begin transforming the residential space into a sterile, high-tech commercial office building. The developer, eager to bypass the usual neighborhood zoning delays, agreed to the strange terms enthusiastically. He dispatched his commercial demolition crews that very same week. I accessed my exterior security cameras one last time before the internet lines were severed. I watched a fleet of heavy construction vehicles roll up my pristine driveway. Workers in hard hats poured out carrying sledgehammers and heavy power tools. They smashed through the custom mahogany front doors. They tore down the expensive silk drapes. They ripped up the imported Italian marble floors Marcus loved to show off. By day 30 of his lavish 74-day European vacation, his pristine residential palace was reduced to exposed wooden beams and industrial concrete. The elegant dining room where he used to mock my illness was now a dusty, echoing construction zone. The demolition was ruthless, efficient, and permanent. Marcus was wandering the streets of Paris, treating them to stolen luxury, completely unaware that his home was actively being obliterated by commercial sledgehammers. He was a man without a house, without a future, funding a vacation with money that would soon trigger his arrest. I watched the construction crews haul a dumpster full of his expensive custom furniture out to the street. I took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction settle deep into my bones. The trap was tightening perfectly. I returned to my laptop. The physical destruction was satisfying but merely a cosmetic blow. I needed to sever the financial arteries keeping Marcus breathing. He relied on the $5 million embezzled from his clients. He believed stolen money made him an untouchable king. It was time to introduce him to federal justice. I opened a secured file transfer protocol. I compiled every single piece of evidence regarding his corporate theft. I had the wire transfer receipts, offshore routing numbers, and fake vendor invoices used to hide missing capital. I bundled these documents into a watertight forensic dossier. I did not send this file to local authorities. I transmitted it to the Cybercrime Division of the FBI and the Criminal Investigation Unit of the IRS. I attached a priority alert detailing how the suspect moved stolen funds across borders. The system flagged it instantly as money laundering and wire fraud. Within minutes, automated federal protocols engaged. I watched my tracking software light up with red warnings. The government moved with terrifying speed when presented with undeniable proof of multi-million-dollar financial crimes. Every bank account tied to Marcus was frozen. His checking accounts, shell company holdings, and corporate cards were instantly locked down by federal mandate. He now possessed absolutely zero liquid assets. In Rome, Marcus was desperately trying to maintain his illusion of absolute control. The fallout from Vivian stealing the church funds had fractured the family dynamic. Tasha complained loudly about the stress, and Vivian was having an emotional breakdown over her ruined reputation in Atlanta. Marcus needed a quick distraction to pacify them. He decided the best way to quiet the complaining was to drown it in luxury. According to my software, he directed his family to an exclusive hotel in the heart of Rome. I tapped into the hotel reservation network, allowing me to monitor transaction data in real time. Marcus walked up to the opulent marble concierge desk, exuding his usual arrogance and entitlement. He loudly demanded their top-tier penthouse suite. He wanted champagne waiting in the room, private balcony access, and dedicated concierge staff at his disposal. The hotel manager politely calculated the astronomical nightly rate and presented the total. Marcus did not flinch. He never flinched when spending money that did not belong to him. He confidently pulled his metal corporate black card from his designer wallet. He slapped it onto the polished marble counter with a dramatic flick of his wrist, expecting the hotel staff to be thoroughly impressed by his elite financial status. The concierge picked up the metal card with a courteous nod and slid it through the secure payment terminal. I watched the transaction attempt register on my monitoring screen. The digital request traveled from the hotel terminal in Italy across the Atlantic Ocean and directly into the American bank. It immediately collided with the federal freeze I had just orchestrated. The response code that shot back across the network was not a standard decline for insufficient funds. It was a severe, high-level law enforcement alert. The code specifically instructed the merchant to retain the physical card and notify authorities immediately due to suspected international money laundering. At the hotel desk, the terminal beeped loudly. A stark red warning message flashed across the manager's computer screen. The concierge stared at the monitor, his polite smile faltering. He looked down at the metal card, then back up at Marcus. "I apologize, sir," the manager said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Your payment method has been declined by your financial institution." Marcus scoffed a harsh sound of immediate irritation. He slammed his hand against the marble counter. "That is absolutely impossible. Run it again. You obviously made a mistake. Do you have any idea how much capital is sitting in that specific account?" "I assure you, sir, the machine is functioning correctly," the manager replied, his eyes shifting nervously toward a silent alarm button located under the desk. "The card is completely blocked." Marcus leaned forward, his face turning an angry shade of red. He was used to bullying service workers to get exactly what he wanted. "Listen to me very closely. I am a vice president at a major American investment firm. I have more money than this entire hotel generates in a year. Stop being incompetent and process the transaction right now before I have your job." Vivian and Tasha stood a few feet away, watching the humiliating scene unfold in the grand lobby. Other wealthy guests were beginning to stare. The facade of their luxurious European vacation was rapidly disintegrating right in front of their eyes. "Run the card again," Marcus yelled, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. He reached across the counter, aggressively attempting to snatch the metal card back from the manager's hands. The manager swiftly pulled the card out of reach, stepping back from the counter. He gave a sharp, subtle nod to the hotel security director standing near the main entrance. The security director immediately turned to two armed Italian police officers who were routinely stationed outside the prestigious building. Marcus continued screaming malicious insults at the terrified hotel staff, aggressively demanding absolute respect, entirely unaware of the severe legal situation rapidly escalating right behind him. He arrogantly demanded to speak directly to the owner of the prestigious hotel, claiming he had powerful connections. He violently threatened to ruin their international reputation online. He was throwing a massive, pathetic tantrum over a useless piece of cold metal that was now completely and utterly worthless. The heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby slid open. The two Italian police officers walked purposefully toward the concierge desk. Their hands rested firmly on their utility belts. They approached Marcus from behind, their expressions stern and unforgiving. They had received the signal from the manager regarding a belligerent foreigner attempting to use a federally flagged stolen credit card. Marcus was about to discover that his stolen millions could no longer protect him. I watched the two Italian police officers close in on Marcus through the hotel lobby's security feed. His arrogant shouting abruptly ceased as a heavy hand clamped down on his tailored shoulder, immediately silencing his pathetic demands for absolute respect from the staff. I did not linger to watch him get violently dragged out into a waiting squad car. I had a much tighter, far more destructive schedule to maintain today. I quickly shifted my immediate focus away from Rome and pulled up the tracking data for my dear sister-in-law Tasha and her husband Bradley. They had currently separated from the group earlier, boarding a high-speed train to Milan. They were desperately trying to outrun the humiliation of Vivian's disastrous church scandal. They were standing inside the flagship Gucci boutique in the heart of the Milan fashion district. I quickly breached the store's localized security network. The high-definition camera feeds populated across my screen, giving me a perfect, unobstructed view of their pathetic retail therapy session. She was practically running through the immaculate aisles, grabbing designer handbags, silk scarves, and oversized sunglasses, piling them into the arms of a highly uncomfortable sales associate. I watched her point to a display case of limited edition leather travel bags demanding the entire set. The total retail value of the ridiculous items she had hastily gathered into her arms easily exceeded $50,000 in less than 20 minutes. Bradley was leaning against a polished glass display counter, looking incredibly bored and utterly superior. He was trying to project the image of a tech billionaire who could afford to humor his distressed wife. He did not know that his cryptocurrency portfolio was currently sitting at negative $2 million. He still believed he had a secret offshore account hidden away from his massive trading losses. He thought this secondary debit card, linked to a shell company in the Bahamas, was his ultimate safety net. What Bradley failed to understand was that forensic auditing leaves absolutely no stone unturned. 2 hours ago, while mapping Marcus's embezzlement web, I had discovered the exact source of Bradley's hidden offshore account. Marcus had used Bradley as a digital mule to wash a portion of the stolen corporate funds. I had already linked the unique routing numbers of Bradley's offshore card directly to the federal money laundering dossier I submitted to the authorities. The card in Bradley's pocket was not a safety net. It was a glowing digital beacon wired straight to Interpol. On my screen, Tasha finally finished her manic shopping spree. She marched up to the pristine marble checkout counter, followed by the struggling sales associate, carrying a mountain of luxury merchandise. The store manager stepped forward to personally handle the massive transaction. He began meticulously scanning each item, wrapping them in crisp tissue paper and placing them into heavy branded shopping bags. Tasha tapped her foot impatiently, looking around the boutique with a haughty glare, daring anyone to judge her excessive spending. Bradley strolled over to the counter, pulling his sleek wallet from his pocket. He pulled out the dark blue offshore debit card. He handed it to the boutique manager with a smug, self-satisfied grin, loudly telling Tasha that he would take care of the bill. The manager took the card, offering a polite, practiced smile, and inserted it into the European point-of-sale terminal. I leaned forward in my hospital bed, my eyes locked on the data stream scrolling across my secondary monitor. The transaction request fired across the encrypted banking network. It hit the offshore banking server in the Bahamas. Simultaneously, the transaction triggered the severe anti-fraud protocols I had activated with the federal authorities. Because the account was explicitly tied to Marcus's multi-million-dollar embezzlement and cross-border wire fraud, the international banking system immediately flagged the transaction as an active money laundering attempt. It was a direct, automated distress signal routed to the local Italian authorities and Interpol. The manager looked down at the screen, his polite smile vanishing instantly. The display instructed him to confiscate the card and secure the premises immediately. He looked up at Bradley, his expression turning cold and suspicious. He placed the card beneath the counter and took a slow step backward. Bradley scoffed loudly, slapping the marble counter, demanding to know what the problem was. He yelled that his account had unlimited funds and accused the manager of running the card incorrectly. Suddenly, a loud, heavy mechanical clank echoed through the high-end boutique. I watched the live feed as the massive reinforced glass front doors of the store automatically slid shut and locked. The heavy metal security deadbolts engaged simultaneously. Tasha jumped backward, dropping her expensive leather purse, looking around the isolated store in a state of sudden panic. Bradley stopped yelling. The smug expression completely melted off his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. The other wealthy shoppers in the store began murmuring nervously, wondering why they were suddenly locked inside. Less than a minute later, the flashing blue lights of Italian police vehicles illuminated the street outside the boutique. Through the glass storefront, I watched two heavily armed tactical police officers stride purposefully toward the entrance. The store manager pressed a button behind the counter, unlocking the front doors just long enough to let the authorities inside. The officers marched straight down the center aisle, their boots clicking sharply against the polished floor. The lead officer spoke in loud, broken English, asking for the American named Bradley. Before Bradley could even process the foreign words or attempt to formulate a pathetic lie to defend his innocence, the aggressive officers grabbed him forcefully by the collar of his gaudy silk shirt. They spun him around violently, shoving him face first against the reinforced glass display counter. Tasha screamed aloud in absolute unadulterated horror as the sharp, distinct metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the suddenly silent luxury store. I watched the live feed from my hospital bed with deep satisfaction as Tasha collapsed to her knees, sobbing hysterically into her designer shopping bags. The tactical officers dragged Bradley out of the boutique, his gaudy silk shirt tearing as he struggled against their grip. He screamed for his wife to call Marcus, completely unaware that Marcus was experiencing his own catastrophic downfall hundreds of miles away in Rome. I closed the Milan security feed and shifted my attention back to the primary target. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had calculated, but the financial strangulation was not quite complete. Tasha dialed her brother in a state of absolute panic. My audio surveillance software intercepted the call the second Marcus answered. He was pacing outside his Roman hotel, furious about his own declined credit cards. When Tasha shrieked that Italian authorities had just arrested Bradley for international money laundering, the remaining color drained from Marcus's face. He knew immediately that the frozen accounts and Bradley's sudden arrest were inextricably linked. He realized the authorities were closing in on his offshore network. But Marcus was a man built on toxic pride. Instead of admitting defeat, he desperately tried to maintain his position as the all-powerful patriarch of the family. He told Tasha to calm down and promised he would handle the situation using his elite connections. Marcus could not use his locked bank accounts or his flagged corporate cards. He had to rely on his emergency physical cash. During his years of moving illicit money, he had acquired the contact information of a highly corrupt local magistrate who specialized in making legal problems quietly disappear. Marcus rushed back up to his hotel room, completely ignoring the glaring stares of the concierge staff who had previously called the police on him. He bypassed the warning of the local authorities who had briefly questioned him in the lobby, managing to slip upstairs before they could formally detain him. He opened the hidden wall safe and pulled out his absolute last remaining safety net. It was a thick envelope containing 50,000 euros in untraceable cash. Marcus arranged a frantic clandestine meeting with the magistrate's associate in a dark alleyway behind the hotel. I listened to the audio feed transmitted through his smartphone microphone as he handed over the heavy envelope. The corrupt official promised to pull strings in Milan, delaying Bradley's formal processing and securing his temporary release before Interpol could officially take custody of him. Marcus paid the exorbitant bribe without a second thought. He handed over every single physical bill he had brought on the trip. He truly believed he was purchasing a temporary reprieve. He thought he could just call his investment firm back in Atlanta, invent a banking error, and have them wire a massive sum directly to a new account. Marcus walked back onto the bustling Roman street, his pockets completely empty. He had no cash for a taxi. He had no working credit cards to buy a simple bottle of water. He was a supposed multimillionaire wandering the historic cobblestones like a common beggar. He found a quiet corner near a public fountain and pulled out his phone. He needed to activate his final lifeline. He dialed the direct private cell phone number of the chief executive officer of his Atlanta investment firm. This was the man who trusted Marcus with millions of dollars in client capital. Marcus cleared his throat, practicing his most confident, authoritative voice. He planned to demand an immediate corporate wire transfer of $200,000 to rectify a supposed security hold on his travel accounts. The phone rang 4 times. Marcus tapped his foot impatiently. Finally, the CEO answered the line, but the voice on the other end did not offer a warm professional greeting. The CEO sounded completely unhinged. He was breathing heavily, shouting over a chaotic background of loud voices smashing glass and blaring sirens. Marcus frowned, pressing the phone tighter against his ear. He tried to speak, but the CEO cut him off with a string of vicious, terrified curses. "Marcus, where are you?" the CEO screamed, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "Do not bother lying to me. The Federal Bureau of Investigation just raided our corporate headquarters. They smashed through the glass doors 10 minutes ago. They are confiscating every single hard drive server and physical ledger in the entire building." Marcus froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He stood paralyzed by the ancient Roman fountain, the bustling tourist crowds moving past him in a blur. "What are you talking about?" Marcus stammered, his confident facade instantly crumbling. There must be a misunderstanding. Tell their lead agent to call my legal team. There is no legal team, Marcus, the CEO roared into the phone. An anonymous forensic auditor submitted a massive, irrefutable dossier to the federal government. They exposed your fake vendor invoices. They traced the $5 million you embezzled from our top-tier clients directly to an offshore shell company. The authorities know everything. You are officially fired, Marcus. Effective immediately. And worse than that, the Department of Justice just issued an international federal warrant for your arrest. The CEO abruptly terminated the connection. The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of a foreign city, staring blindly at the darkened screen of his smartphone. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the hard cobblestone street with a sharp crack. His legs gave out, forcing him to lean heavily against the cold stone of the fountain. He had no job. He had no physical cash. His credit cards were federally frozen. He was actively being hunted by the United States government. He looked around at the beautiful, romantic city of Rome. He suddenly realized the terrifying reality of his situation. He was stranded on another continent, absolutely penniless, facing decades in federal prison, and he still had 34 agonizing days left on his luxurious European vacation. I watched the GPS tracker on Marcus's phone slowly move away from the ancient fountain. He stumbled back to the luxury hotel in a complete daze, entirely stripped of his arrogant swagger. The situation inside the grand lobby had rapidly deteriorated during his brief, disastrous meeting in the alleyway. The hotel manager, having received no valid payment method and growing increasingly suspicious of the police presence, had officially terminated their reservation. Massive security guards were actively escorting Vivian, Tasha, and Bradley out the revolving glass doors. They were dragging their heavy designer suitcases across the polished marble, loudly protesting the immediate eviction. Marcus approached his family just as the guards physically blocked them from re-entering the premises. He did not yell. He did not threaten to sue the hotel. He simply grabbed the handle of his expensive luggage and told them to start walking. They wandered the historic streets of Rome for hours, dragging wheels over uneven cobblestones under the punishing afternoon sun. They were a pathetic parade of disgraced luxury. With absolutely no credit cards and no physical cash, their options were reduced to zero. Marcus eventually used a prepaid transit application on his phone, burning the very last digital credits he possessed, to book a single cramped room in a notoriously cheap hostel on the absolute outskirts of the city. Through the microphone on Marcus's phone, I listened to the sounds of their new reality. The heavy wooden door of the hostel room creaked loudly as it swung open. The space was incredibly small, smelling strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. There was no room service. There were no plush velvet cushions or waterfront balconies. There were just two stained bunk beds pushed tightly against peeling wallpaper. Tasha immediately burst into tears, dramatically dropping her luxury shopping bags onto the dirty linoleum floor. She demanded to know why Marcus was putting them through this horrific humiliation. Vivian sat heavily on the bottom bunk, weeping uncontrollably about her shattered reputation at the Buckhead megachurch. She wailed that her elite friends were completely ignoring her calls, entirely unaware that I had engineered her total social destruction. Marcus stood frozen by the cracked window, staring blankly at the rusted metal bars covering the glass. He finally broke the news to his demanding family. He told them the FBI had raided his investment firm. He confessed that his corporate accounts were empty. His prestigious job was gone, and there was a federal warrant for his immediate arrest. The tiny room erupted into absolute chaos. The volume of their screaming triggered the peak audio alerts on my monitoring software. Tasha shrieked at her brother, calling him a stupid, greedy fool for jeopardizing their lavish lifestyle. Vivian turned her fierce anger toward Tasha, blaming her excessive shopping habits for draining Marcus's resources. But the most violent reaction came from Bradley. He had been pacing frantically in the cramped corner, obsessively refreshing his cryptocurrency application, praying the negative $2 million balance was just a glitch. When Marcus confirmed the federal raid, Bradley finally snapped. The mask of the polite, cultured financial guru completely fell away, revealing the deeply entrenched bigotry and absolute entitlement underneath. Bradley aggressively shoved his way into the center of the room, his face twisted in pure rage. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Marcus and Vivian. "I am a white American citizen," Bradley yelled, his voice echoing violently off the thin walls. "I am absolutely not going down for you ghetto fraudsters. You dragged me into this mess. You stole money from a church. You embezzled from your clients. I am going straight to the United States Embassy tomorrow morning and telling them you held me hostage." The racist, highly offensive outburst sucked all the air out of the suffocating room. Vivian stopped crying instantly. Her deep-seated pride, the only thing she truly valued besides money, flared up like a raging fire. She stood up from the creaking bunk bed, her eyes narrowing with lethal fury. She marched straight up to Bradley. Without a single word of warning, she raised her right hand and slapped him directly across the face. The sharp, resounding crack of her palm striking his cheek sounded exactly like a gunshot through my laptop speakers. Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his face in shock. Then all hell completely broke loose. Bradley lunged forward, shoving Vivian hard against the wall. Tasha screamed, launching herself at her husband's back, clawing wildly at his torn silk shirt to protect her mother. Marcus, snapping out of his paralyzed daze, threw a heavy punch at Bradley's jaw. The four of them collapsed into a tangled, vicious physical brawl in the center of the tiny hostel room. They knocked over a rusty floor lamp. They smashed their expensive luggage against the cheap drywall. They were tearing each other apart, screaming vicious insults, completely destroying whatever fragile family bond they claimed to share. The deafening noise of the brawl quickly attracted the attention of the hostel owner. I heard heavy boots stomping down the hallway. The door was violently kicked open. An angry Italian man started screaming at the top of his lungs, threatening to call the local police immediately if they did not vacate the premises. The threat of facing Italian law enforcement again terrified Marcus. He shoved Bradley away, grabbed his mother by the arm, and forced his bleeding, bruised family out into the corridor. The hostel owner physically threw them out onto the dark, rain-slicked Italian streets. The sky had opened up, pouring cold, heavy rain over the ancient city. I watched their miserable figures through a nearby public traffic camera I had accessed. They sat huddled together in the wet, filthy gutter, surrounded by their ruined designer luggage. Tasha was sobbing into her hands. Bradley sat far away, nursing his bruised jaw. Vivian looked completely broken, her expensive hair plastered to her wet face. Marcus sat perfectly still in the freezing rain. He did not look at his crying mother or his furious sister. He stared blankly at the rushing water in the gutter. Slowly, a dark, desperate realization crept across his bruised face. He reached into his wet pocket and gripped his broken smartphone. I could hear his low, raspy whisper through the damaged microphone. "We just need to get back to Atlanta," Marcus muttered to himself, his voice completely devoid of any remaining sanity. "Serena is dead. She is lying on the floor right now. I have the $10 million life insurance policy. That will fix absolutely everything. I just need to get home and claim my money." The sun rose over Rome, illuminating the misery of my in-laws. They spent the night huddled under a narrow awning near a busy train station. They were freezing, soaked to the bone, and hungry. Tasha shivered violently in her ruined designer dress. Bradley refused to speak, his arms crossed tightly as he glared at passing commuters. Marcus looked like a broken shell of the arrogant executive he was yesterday. His custom suit was stained with mud and wrinkled. He knew they needed flights back to Atlanta immediately, but commercial tickets cost thousands. They had no digital access and no cash. Vivian stood up, her joints popping in the cold air. Her pristine church matriarch persona was shattered, but her desperate need to survive remained. She looked down at her right hand. Resting on her index finger was a massive, glittering gemstone. It was the prized heirloom diamond ring Marcus gifted her 2 years ago for Mother's Day. He loudly announced to the megachurch congregation that the flawless stone cost $50,000. Vivian loved flashing it during Sunday service, using it as proof of divine favor and her son's financial success. She slowly pulled the heavy ring off her trembling finger. She handed it to Marcus and told him to find a pawn shop. She was willing to sacrifice her most prized possession to save her family from starving. They walked 2 miles to a pawn shop located in a busy commercial district. The bell above the door chimed as the four disheveled Americans walked inside. The shop owner, an older Italian man with a jeweler's loop resting on his forehead, eyed their dirty clothes suspiciously. Vivian stepped up to the glass counter. She placed the massive ring down with a heavy sigh of theatrical sacrifice. She confidently demanded 20,000 euros in cash, proudly stating it was a flawless, custom-cut diamond. The pawnbroker picked up the ring. He did not look impressed. He screwed the magnifying loop into his right eye and turned on a bright halogen examination lamp. He studied the stone for less than 10 seconds. Then he let out a loud, barking laugh. He tossed the ring carelessly back onto the glass counter. He looked directly at Vivian and spoke in heavily accented English. He told her the stone was absolutely worthless. It was not a diamond. It was a cheap piece of cubic zirconia set in low-grade plated metal. He said he would not even pay 50 euros for it. Vivian froze. The color drained from her face. She turned her head slowly, eyes locking onto Marcus. Tasha gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. Bradley let out a harsh bark of laughter. Marcus took a step backward, his face turning bright red with intense shame. He lied to his own mother. He bought her a cheap fake piece of costume jewelry just to maintain his wealthy image at church, secretly pocketing the actual cash for himself. The ultimate symbol of Vivian's religious status was a total fraud. Vivian let out a guttural scream of absolute humiliation. She picked up the fake ring and threw it directly at his chest. She cursed him, crying that he made her a walking joke. The pawnbroker yelled at them to get out immediately before he called the authorities. Marcus practically shoved his family out the door, desperate to escape his mother's screaming. They stood on the busy sidewalk, entirely out of options. Marcus knew he had to make the ultimate personal sacrifice. He unclasped the heavy solid gold Rolex watch from his wrist. He bought it with his very first massive corporate bonus. It was his signature piece, the item that validated his superiority in every boardroom he entered. He walked back into the pawn shop alone. He placed the heavy gold watch on the counter. The pawnbroker examined it closely. He confirmed it was authentic, but he recognized a desperate man when he saw one. The pawnbroker offered a brutally low price. It was a mere fraction of the watch's actual retail value, but it was just barely enough to purchase 4 one-way tickets back to the United States. Marcus gritted his teeth, his massive ego completely crushed, and accepted the insulting stack of cash. They took a crowded public bus to the airport. Marcus quickly approached the ticketing counter. Buying last-minute tickets with limited cash, he could not afford direct flights or comfortable seats. He was forced to purchase 4 miserable economy tickets on the cheapest budget airline available. The punishing itinerary involved 3 separate connections before finally landing in Atlanta. It would take over 30 hours of agonizing travel. Tasha cried loudly when she saw the cheap boarding passes. Bradley threatened to sue Marcus for severe emotional distress. Vivian refused to look at her son, staring blankly at her bare ring finger. They smelled of damp sweat, dirty street water, and total despair. Hours later, they finally boarded the crowded aircraft. They were shoved into the very last row, directly next to the foul-smelling airplane lavatories. As the plane taxied down the runway, taking them back to America, Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and locked himself inside the tiny, cramped bathroom. Through my audio monitoring link to his phone, I listened to his ragged breathing over the roar of the jet engines. He turned on the harsh fluorescent light and stared at his exhausted reflection in the stained mirror. He splashed cold water on his face. He knew exactly what he had to do the second he landed. He began to practice. I listened as he forced his voice to crack. He let out a fake, trembling sob. He practiced screaming my name in mock horror. He rehearsed the frantic words he would say to the emergency dispatcher. He was perfecting his grieving widow routine. I was fully preparing to open our front door, discover my dead body on the floor, and claim his $10 million prize. He stepped out of the foul airplane lavatory and squeezed down the narrow aisle. The budget airline was a flying metal tube of misery. Marcus shoved himself into the middle seat of the very last row, his knees pressed painfully against the hard plastic tray table. The relentless roar of the engines made sleep impossible. He looked at his family. They were a portrait of devastation. Tasha sat in the window seat, her ruined designer dress stained with spilled coffee. She stared blankly out the scratched window, chewing nervously on her thumb. Across the aisle, Vivian sat rigidly upright. She muttered frantic, fragmented prayers under her breath. She kept rubbing her bare ring finger, obsessing over the loss of her fake diamond and her shattered reputation at the Buckhead megachurch. She was terrified of what awaited her in Atlanta, unaware her social standing was already ashes. Bradley was squeezed into the aisle seat next to Vivian. He had not spoken a word since boarding this final leg of their grueling journey. He was furiously typing on a cracked smartphone he could not even connect to the internet. Suddenly, he stopped. He turned his head and glared directly at Tasha across the aisle. Bradley did not lower his voice. He leaned across Marcus and pointed a shaking finger at his wife. "I want a divorce," Bradley stated, his voice sharp. "The absolute second we land in Atlanta, I am walking away. I am hiring a defense attorney, and I am telling the federal authorities that you and your brother dragged me into this massive financial conspiracy without my knowledge." Tasha snapped, her head around, her eyes wide with fresh horror. "You cannot do that. We are married. You used my money to fund your stupid cryptocurrency trading." "I have zero money because of your criminal family," Bradley shouted, ignoring the annoyed glares of the exhausted passengers. "You people are toxic. You stole from a church. Marcus embezzled millions. The government seized my trading portfolio because of your brother's illegal accounts. I am a white man with a clean criminal record. I am not letting your ghetto fraud ring drag me into federal prison. I am claiming total ignorance, and I am leaving you with absolutely nothing." Tasha burst into hysterical tears. She lunged across Marcus, trying to grab Bradley's shirt, begging him not to abandon her when she had no money and no home. Bradley violently slapped her hand away. Vivian stopped her frantic praying. She looked at Bradley with pure, unfiltered hatred, but she was too emotionally exhausted to slap him again. Instead, she buried her face in her hands and wept loudly, mourning the total destruction of her perfect family image. Marcus sat perfectly still in the middle seat, wedged between his sobbing sister and his raging brother-in-law. He did not attempt to stop the brutal divorce unfolding across his lap. He simply closed his eyes and tuned out their screaming. He did not care about Bradley leaving or his mother's ruined church status. He only cared about the mathematical equation running through his mind. $10 million. That was the magic number. It was the only thing that mattered. He began to meticulously visualize the timeline. They would land in Atlanta in 3 hours. They would take a cheap rideshare back to the Buckhead mansion. He would walk up the driveway, insert his key into the front door, and step inside the sweltering, silent house. He would walk into the living room and find Serena's lifeless body on the Persian rug. He would drop to his knees and force himself to cry. He would dial the emergency dispatcher and scream that he returned from Europe to find his sick wife dead. The authorities would see the shut-off valves, but he would blame a faulty electrical panel. The coroner would rule it a tragic complication of her disease. The insurance company would have to pay out the policy. He would take the $10 million hire defense attorneys to beat the embezzlement charges and disappear to an island. It was a flawless plan. While Marcus was calculating his impending payout in the back row of a budget airline, I was sitting miles away in downtown Atlanta. I was not lying dead on a hardwood floor. I was fully healed, energized, and vibrating with absolute power. I sat behind a massive polished glass desk inside a pristine commercial boardroom. The walls were painted a blinding sterile white. The tall windows offered a commanding view of the bustling city streets below. I wore a sleek, tailored black power suit that fit me perfectly. My hair was styled sharply, and my makeup was flawless. I did not look like a weak, dying housewife. I looked like the lethal elite forensic auditor I had always been. I picked up a delicate porcelain cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of freshly brewed espresso. The rich, dark, bitter taste grounded me perfectly in the reality of my absolute victory. Resting directly on the glass desk in front of me was my encrypted tablet device. The screen displayed a live high-definition radar map of global flight paths. A small flashing red icon crawled slowly across the digital map, steadily approaching the eastern seaboard of the United States. I tapped the icon, expanding the flight details. It was a budget commercial airline flying direct from Rome to Atlanta. The estimated time of arrival was exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. I set my espresso cup down on the glass desk with a soft, definitive clink. I leaned forward, my eyes locked onto the flashing red icon, representing the metal tube carrying the people who tried to murder me. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I traced the flight path with my index finger, eagerly anticipating the total destruction waiting for them on the ground. "Welcome home, darling," I whispered softly to the completely empty room ready for the end. The budget commercial airliner hit the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with a heavy, violent jolt. The punishing, suffocating humidity of the Georgia summer immediately enveloped Marcus the second he stepped off the jet bridge. His tailored suit, once a symbol of his elite corporate status, was now a wrinkled, foul-smelling mess of sweat and spilled airplane coffee. He stood at the crowded baggage claim, his bloodshot eyes darting around nervously. He pulled his cracked smartphone from his pocket. He had absolutely zero access to his frozen domestic bank accounts. He could not summon his usual private black car service. He could not afford a luxury limousine. He was forced to clutch the very last crumpled bills he had received from pawning his gold Rolex watch in Rome. Marcus guided his exhausted, traumatized family toward the designated rideshare pickup zone. Vivian complained loudly about the oppressive heat, dragging her scuffed designer luggage across the concrete pavement. Tasha and Bradley walked 10 paces behind them, locked in a bitter, hostile silence. Marcus ignored them all. He hailed the absolute cheapest ride option available on his application. 10 minutes later, a battered, faded silver sedan pulled up to the curb. The vehicle smelled strongly of cheap pine air freshener and stale cigarette smoke. The driver did not offer to help them load their heavy bags into the cramped trunk. Vivian gasped in sheer horror as she was forced to slide into the stained fabric back seat. Her knees pressed painfully against the plastic console. Bradley stared out the window, his jaw clenched tight, mentally preparing his defensive statements for the federal authorities. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat. He stared straight ahead at the highway traffic. He was entirely consumed by the singular dark thought echoing in his mind. He was just miles away from his salvation. I truly believed his wife was rotting on their living room floor. He calculated that the police investigation would take exactly 3 days and the insurance payout would follow shortly after. He just needed to survive the next 72 hours. While Marcus was suffering in the suffocating heat of the cheap sedan, I was putting the final flawless touches on my elaborate trap. The commercial real estate developer had executed my demolition demands with ruthless, breathtaking efficiency. The grand Buckhead residential mansion. Marcus loved to brag about no longer existed on the inside. The imported Italian marble floors had been completely ripped out and replaced with sterile commercial-grade gray carpeting. The expensive silk drapes and antique mahogany bookshelves were entirely gone. The ground floor had been aggressively transformed into a high-tech minimalist corporate office space. Bright cold light-emitting diode panels hung from the exposed industrial ceiling. Sleek frosted glass partitions divided the once open living room into functional cubicles. I sat at the head of a massive polished glass conference table positioned exactly where our plush velvet sofas used to be. The room was perfectly air-conditioned, carrying the sharp, clean scent of fresh paint and new electronics. I checked my diamond wristwatch. It was time to invite the guests of honor. The heavy glass double doors at the front of the building slid open. The chief executive officer of Marcus's former investment firm walked into the boardroom. His face was flushed with intense, righteous anger. He carried a thick leather briefcase stuffed with internal audit reports. He walked straight over to me and firmly shook my hand. He thanked me profusely for sending the anonymous forensic dossier. I explained that my undeniable evidence allowed him to isolate the stolen $5 million and protect his clients before the federal raid completely destroyed his firm. A moment later, Two tall, sharply dressed federal agents from the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped into the room. They unbuttoned their suit jackets, revealing their holstered weapons and gold badges. They carried the official signed federal arrest warrants for Marcus and Bradley. Right behind them walked a stern, calculating investigator from the Internal Revenue Service. She dropped a massive stack of manila folders onto the glass table. The folders contained thousands of pages documenting Vivian's charity fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement of church funds. I stood up and addressed the room. I explained the final parameters of the sting operation. I told the federal agents that Marcus was currently en route. I warned them that he fully expected to find my dead body inside the house. I advised them to remain perfectly silent and out of sight in the back corners of the boardroom. I wanted Marcus to walk through the front doors and confess his murderous intentions out loud before he even realized law enforcement was standing in the very same room. The agents nodded in agreement, taking their positions in the shadowy corners of the new commercial space. I walked over to the tall, tinted front window. I clasped my hands behind my back, my posture perfectly straight. I looked down the long, winding driveway. The landscaping had been completely bulldozed, replaced by freshly painted commercial parking lines. The battered, faded silver ride-share sedan slowly turned into the expansive driveway. The car sputtered and parked awkwardly across three newly designated parking spots. The doors popped open. Marcus stepped out first. He looked completely disheveled, his clothes stained and hanging loosely off his exhausted frame. He reached into his pocket to pay the driver with his crumpled cash. As he turned to face the building, I watched his expression change. Despite his ruined clothes, despite his active federal warrants, and despite the miserable family standing behind him, a sick, incredibly greedy grin stretched wide across his bruised face. He looked at the commercial front doors with absolute terrifying anticipation. He thought he was walking into a graveyard that would make him rich. He had absolutely no idea he was walking straight into a federal prison sentence. The heavy Georgia humidity pressed down on Marcus, like a suffocating blanket, as he turned his back to the departing rideshare. He tightened his grip on the handle of his scuffed suitcase. The cheap plastic wheels scraped harshly against the pavement as he began the long walk up the steep driveway. Behind him, his family formed a pathetic parade of disgraced luxury. Vivian trailed back, complaining loudly about the heat radiating through the soles of her ruined designer shoes. Tasha and Bradley dragged their battered bags in hostile silence, consumed by their impending divorce. Marcus tuned out their whining. He focused his bloodshot eyes on the massive structure resting at the top of the hill. He was so fixated on the $10 million prize waiting inside that his exhausted brain failed to process the visual anomalies staring him in the face. The lush green lawn he loved to brag about was eradicated. The imported Japanese maple trees had been bulldozed. In their place stretched a vast expanse of freshly poured industrial asphalt. White commercial parking lines were painted neatly across the former botanical garden. Marcus blinked, wiping dirty sweat from his forehead. A fleeting moment of confusion crossed his face, but suffocating greed instantly overpowered his logic. He assumed the local homeowners association had initiated some sort of utility project while he was overseas. It simply did not matter to him. Nothing mattered except the dead body of his wife waiting on the floor and the massive insurance payout that would solve all his criminal problems. He paused near the middle of the newly paved parking lot, dropping his suitcase handle. He turned around to face his miserable, exhausted family. His expression hardened into a mask of calculated manipulation. He needed them to play their parts perfectly to ensure the local authorities did not suspect a thing. He pointed a sharp, trembling finger directly at his mother. He commanded Vivian to stop complaining about her swollen feet and remember how to cry on cue. He reminded Tasha and Bradley that their marital disputes were entirely irrelevant right now. He strictly ordered them to act traumatized, warning them that the neighbors were likely watching from their front windows. They needed to look like a devastated family, returning from an international flight, unaware of the domestic tragedy hiding behind their front door. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing his physical performance. He aggressively rubbed his bloodshot eyes with his dirty hands, making the sclera bright red and irritated. He forced his shoulders to slump forward, mimicking the heavy weight of profound exhaustion and impending grief. He practiced a sharp hitch in his breathing, perfecting the exact audio cue of a devastated husband about to make a traumatic discovery. He nodded to himself, satisfied with his manipulative performance. He turned back around and marched purposefully toward the grand entryway, fully prepared to execute the final phase of his dark, murderous scheme. The heat radiating off the fresh black asphalt baked his ruin-tailored suit, but Marcus did not slow his pace. He marched up the wide concrete steps leading to the main entrance. His mind raced through the exact sequence of actions he was about to perform. He would unlock the heavy wooden door, push it open, and immediately let out a loud, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. He would collapse onto the foyer floor, violently shaking his dead wife's shoulders, begging her to wake up. He would demand that Bradley dial emergency services. He would force out crocodile tears for the paramedics and local police officers. He had rehearsed this twisted theatrical performance hundreds of times in the filthy airplane bathroom. He was absolutely ready to deliver the performance of his miserable life. He reached the top of the steps and marched straight toward the entryway. His eyes were fixed downward, searching his deep pockets for his heavy silver keychain. He finally wrapped his trembling fingers around the jagged metal key. He pulled it out, gripping it tightly as he stepped up to the threshold. He raised his right hand forcefully, pushing the metal key forward to slide it into the familiar brass deadbolt. His hand forcefully hit smooth, unyielding glass. Marcus gasped, stumbling backward in absolute shock. He dropped his heavy silver keyring, the metal clattering loudly against the concrete porch. He looked up, his bloodshot eyes widening in total horror. The massive custom-carved solid mahogany double doors were gone. The heavy brass deadbolt he had locked 74 days ago no longer existed. In their place stood a towering industrial-grade pane of reinforced, frosted commercial security glass. Marcus stared at the sleek, modern barricade, his exhausted brain violently struggling to process the impossible image. He lunged forward, pressing his sweaty palms flat against the cold, hard glass. He desperately searched the smooth surface for a traditional keyhole. There was absolutely nothing. Where the vintage brass handle used to be a sleek, glowing commercial biometric fingerprint scanner was seamlessly integrated into the metal doorframe. A small red indicator light pulsed steadily, mocking his profound confusion. Marcus panicked. His carefully rehearsed performance completely evaporated, replaced by genuine terror. He balled his hands into tight fists and started violently banging against the reinforced glass. He screamed at the top of his lungs, demanding to know what happened to his expensive mahogany doors. He kicked the lower frame with his scuffed designer loafer, his voice cracking with desperation. His family stood frozen at the bottom of the concrete steps, staring up at him in silence, completely paralyzed by the bizarre scene unfolding before their eyes. Marcus raised his fist to strike the glass again. Suddenly, a soft mechanical chime echoed from the biometric scanner. The glowing red indicator light instantly flashed to a brilliant, welcoming green. A low, powerful electronic hum vibrated through the metal frame. Marcus froze, his bloody knuckles hovering just inches from the surface. The heavy automated commercial glass double doors smoothly and silently slid wide open. Marcus stumbled over the metal threshold, nearly losing his balance, as the heavy commercial glass doors slid shut behind him with a soft, definitive hiss. The blast of freezing, over-engineered air conditioning hit his sweating face, a stark contrast to the oppressive Georgia heat outside. He dropped his cheap suitcase, the plastic cracking loudly against the floor. He opened his mouth to scream for emergency dispatchers, ready to unleash his carefully rehearsed cries of grief. But the sound died in his throat. He blinked, his bloodshot eyes violently shaking his head, convinced the intense jet lag was causing a severe visual hallucination. This was the correct street address. This was the exact geographic location of his prestigious Buckhead estate. But the interior did not match his memory. He charged forward, his fists clenched, his voice echoing sharply in the vast space. "What happened to my house?" Marcus roared, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "Where are my things? Who did this?" Behind him, the automated doors triggered again. Vivian, Tasha, and Bradley cautiously stepped into the building. They dragged their ruined designer luggage inside, their exhausted complaints instantly dying on their lips. Vivian gasped, her hands flying to her face as she surveyed the bizarre scene. Bradley dropped his bags, his eyes darting around the perimeter, his paranoid mind immediately sensing a highly coordinated trap. Tasha simply stood frozen, her jaw hanging open in sheer disbelief. The magnificent residential palace they had left behind 74 days ago had been entirely eradicated. The grand sweeping staircase with its custom wrought iron railing was boarded up behind sleek frosted privacy glass. The imported Italian marble floors Vivian used to brag about at her church luncheons had been violently torn out, replaced by tightly woven sterile gray commercial carpeting. The glittering crystal chandelier that once dominated the two-story foyer was gone. In its place, bright cold light emitting diode panels hung suspended from exposed industrial ductwork, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare over everything. Marcus staggered further into the massive room, spinning around blindly in tight, frantic circles. The lavish living room where he had poured his scotch and plotted a $10 million murder no longer existed. The plush velvet sofa, the antique mahogany bookshelves, the expensive Persian rugs were completely wiped from existence. The sprawling open concept area had been aggressively carved into functional minimalist corporate workspaces. Symmetrical rows of empty cubicles lined the perimeter. The walls were painted a blinding surgical white that hurt his exhausted eyes. It looked exactly like a high-tech corporate headquarters, entirely devoid of any residential warmth or personal history. Vivian stumbled forward, clutching her chest. "My antique credenza!" she whimpered, her voice trembling with shock. "My custom silk drapery. Marcus, where is our furniture? Have we been robbed? Call the police immediately." "Shut up, Mom!" Marcus snapped, his panic morphing into a chaotic, unhinged rage. He did not care about the furniture. His brain was violently short-circuiting. He had spent the last 18 hours visualizing a corpse. He needed a dead body. He needed the insurance money. He sprinted toward the area where the kitchen used to be, finding only an empty break room with stainless steel commercial appliances. He ran back toward the center of the room, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. "Serena!" Marcus screamed, his voice raw and desperate. "Where are you? What is going on here?" Bradley slowly backed away toward the front doors, his survival instincts finally kicking in. He noticed the discreet dome-shaped security cameras mounted in every corner of the ceiling. Their tiny red recording lights blinked in perfect unison. He realized they were standing inside a fully operational commercial facility, and they were officially trespassing. He reached for the glass doors, but they remained locked tight. The biometric scanner outside controlled the entry, but there was no manual override on the inside. They were trapped. Marcus stopped spinning. His frantic gaze finally landed on the far end of the massive room. Positioned directly in the center of the former living area sat a gigantic polished glass conference table. It was surrounded by sleek, ergonomic leather office chairs. At the very head of the table, facing the large windows overlooking the ruined backyard, sat a single figure. The heavy black leather chair smoothly swiveled around to face the center of the expansive room, revealing the architect of their total destruction. My hands rested elegantly on the polished glass surface of the conference table. I was not a rotting corpse. I was not a weak, fragile, dying housewife. I was radiating absolute health, tremendous wealth, and unyielding power. I wore a sharp, tailored black designer power suit that projected total authority. My hair was styled flawlessly. My makeup was pristine, hiding any trace of the illness I had conquered 74 days ago. I looked directly into his wide, bloodshot, deeply terrified eyes, refusing to break contact for even a single fleeting second of this glorious reunion. I watched the remaining blood completely drain from his bruised face. His knees buckled slightly, his body physically rejecting the impossible reality sitting right in front of him. Vivian let out a strangled, horrified gasp, clutching her son's arm for support. Tasha froze entirely, her eyes widening to the size of saucers, completely unable to comprehend my miraculous resurrection. I picked up my delicate porcelain cup, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my freshly brewed espresso. The rich, bitter taste of the dark roasted coffee grounded me perfectly in the absolute triumph of this highly anticipated, perfectly orchestrated moment. I set the cup down with a sharp, echoing clink. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold glass table. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face as I looked at the miserable, filthy family standing in my corporate boardroom. Did you enjoy Europe, Marcus? Marcus stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. The heavy silence in the massive corporate boardroom was deafening. He raised a shaking hand, pointing a dirty finger in my direction. His knees gave out completely. He collapsed onto the newly installed gray commercial carpeting, his tailored suit wrinkling around his trembling frame. He shook his head violently from side to side, refusing to accept the living, breathing reality sitting just a few feet away from him. "You are a ghost," Marcus stammered, his voice dropping to a harsh, panicked whisper. "This is not real. You are dead. I left you on the floor. You are dead." I pushed my chair back from the glass conference table. I stood up slowly, ensuring every single movement projected absolute, undeniable authority. The sharp click of my designer heels echoed loudly across the expansive, sterile room as I took a deliberate step toward him. "I am very much alive, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the freezing air conditioning like a freshly sharpened blade. "I survived your pathetic attempt at murder without a single scratch. But your net worth, that is dead. Your career is dead. Your precious financial empire has been completely eradicated." Behind him, Vivian finally snapped out of her paralyzed state of shock. She frantically looked around the vast, empty commercial space, her brain desperately trying to cling to the material possessions she valued above everything else in the world. She ignored the fact that her son had just confessed to leaving his wife for dead. She only cared about her beloved expensive objects. "My house!" Vivian shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Where is my antique credenza? Where are the imported Persian rugs? Where is the custom dining table I shipped from Italy? What have you done with my beautiful furniture, Serena?" I looked at my mother-in-law with a cold, unforgiving smile. "This is not your house, Vivian. It never was. I legally owned this entire plot of land 2 years before I even met your deceitful son." Marcus secretly took out a highly illegal, fraudulent second mortgage to fund your flashy lifestyle. I just sold the entire estate to a commercial real estate developer for $4 million in pure cash. As for your precious antique furniture, I had the construction demolition crews haul it all away. I donated every single expensive piece you owned directly to a local women's shelter in downtown Atlanta. You have absolutely nothing left. Vivian let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She dropped her designer handbag and covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably over the loss of her materialistic status symbols. Tasha grabbed her mother's arm, her own face pale with sheer terror as she realized the true terrifying scope of my revenge. "You cannot do this to us," Tasha yelled, her voice trembling. "We are your family. You cannot just sell our home and throw us out on the street. We will call the police and have you arrested for theft." "You are highly mistaken, Tasha," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "I executed a perfectly legal commercial real estate transaction. You do not reside here anymore. In fact, right now, the four of you are actively trespassing on private commercial property. The new corporate owners are very strict about unauthorized visitors wandering around their high-tech facility." Marcus remained on his knees, his eyes darting frantically around the bright, sterile room. His exhausted mind was desperately trying to calculate a way out of this trap. He knew his domestic bank accounts were frozen. He knew his offshore crypto accounts had been seized. He knew the church charity funds had been exposed. Every single safety net he had ever relied upon had been systematically destroyed. The $10 million life insurance policy was a worthless piece of digital paper. He had played a high-stakes game of murder and greed, and he had lost everything entirely. He looked back up at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. "You set us up. You planned all of this from the very beginning. You let us fly to Europe just so you could steal my money and ruin my life behind my back." "I did not steal anything, Marcus. I stated calmly, staring down at him with absolute contempt. I simply returned the stolen funds to their rightful owners and reported your massive financial crimes to the proper authorities. You ruined your own life the second you dumped my medication down the kitchen sink and locked that heavy deadbolt. You built your own prison cell. I just handed the keys to the government. Suddenly, the reality of the phrase proper authorities echoed loudly in the tense boardroom. Bradley, who had been standing silently near the sliding glass doors, felt his survival instincts violently kick into overdrive. He did not care about Marcus, Tasha, or Vivian. He only cared about saving his own skin from federal prosecution. He realized that if I had the power to freeze his international crypto portfolio, I definitely had the power to put him behind bars. Bradley spun around wildly. He abandoned his ruined luggage and sprinted aggressively toward the front entrance. He slammed his hands against the biometric glass doors, desperately trying to force them open. He planned to run out into the suffocating Georgia heat, hail a passing car, and flee straight to the nearest international airport. He never made it. Before Bradley could even bang on the glass a second time, two tall, imposing figures stepped out from the dark, shadowy corners of the newly renovated lobby. They wore dark tactical gear and carried themselves with unmistakable federal authority. They were the armed agents from the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They moved with terrifying speed, stepping directly into Bradley's path and entirely blocking the only exit out of the commercial building. Bradley gasped, stumbling backward in sheer terror. The ultimate reckoning had officially arrived for him. The two federal agents forcefully pushed Bradley back into the center of the brightly lit boardroom in absolute silence. Their hands rested firmly on their holstered weapons. A stern woman stepped out from the adjacent glass-partitioned office, wearing a sharp gray suit, holding a massive stack of thick manila folders. She flashed a silver badge identifying herself as a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. The overwhelming presence of multiple federal agencies standing inside his former living room caused Marcus to stop breathing. The desperate glimmer of hope he had been secretly harboring instantly vanished. He finally understood the absolute inescapable scale of his total destruction. I was not just facing a bitter divorce or a ruined reputation. He was facing the full crushing weight of the United States justice system. I picked up a silver remote from the glass table and pressed a single button. The massive blank white wall directly behind me seamlessly slid open, revealing a gigantic state-of-the-art digital presentation screen. The federal agents secured the perimeter, standing like statues as the screen hummed to life. I tapped my tablet screen, instantly casting a high-definition video file onto the massive display for everyone to see. It was the security footage I had captured from the hidden living room cameras just 74 days ago. The audio echoed loudly through the high-tech commercial speakers mounted in the ceiling. Marcus and Vivian watched in sheer horror as the digital version of Marcus poured a glass of scotch on the screen. The entire room listened as the recorded voice of Bradley asked if the life insurance policy was locked in. They heard Marcus arrogantly assure him that the underwriting was processed and that nature would simply take its course. The brutal, undeniable sound of Bradley laughing about using my $10 million death payout to cover his massive cryptocurrency debts and buy a coastal villa in Monaco filled the freezing air. The final sickening clink of their crystal glasses, toasting to a profitable tragedy, sealed their absolute guilt. I paused the video, letting the damning silence suffocate the room. I reached under the glass table, pulling out a thick, meticulously organized black binder. I stood up and walked confidently over to the lead agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I handed the physical dossier into his waiting hands. I clearly stated that the binder contained undeniable forensic proof of premeditated attempted murder combined with documented life insurance fraud. I explained it included the forged digital signatures, fraudulent underwriting documents, and specific routing numbers Marcus intended to use to hide the payout. The agent nodded sharply, officially accepting the evidence into federal custody. Bradley collapsed onto his knees, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale white. He violently pointed his shaking finger at Marcus. He burst into loud, pathetic tears, crying uncontrollably in front of the federal agents. He screamed that he was just a clueless victim. He swore he was completely innocent, claiming Marcus and Tasha had manipulated him into the conversation. He begged the agents to let him go, insisting he never actually touched any illegal money and had no real part in the financial crimes. He thought his tears would save him from federal prison. I walked back to my tablet and swiped my finger across the smooth glass. The giant presentation screen behind me instantly shifted from the security footage to a complex financial ledger. I highlighted a specific set of international banking documents. I looked down at Bradley as he sobbed on the commercial carpeting. I loudly announced that the screen displayed his verified digital signature, authorizing the opening of highly leveraged offshore margin accounts. I explained that he had stolen my social security number to facilitate the identity theft, but he had used his own biometric data to authorize the international wire transfers. I reminded him that playing the ignorant victim does not work when his digital fingerprints are stamped all over a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. Bradley stopped crying and stared at the floor, completely paralyzed by the irrefutable evidence of his own overwhelming guilt. Tasha took a slow, terrified step away from her husband. She looked at Bradley with a mixture of profound disgust and sheer panic, finally realizing the man she married was entirely responsible for dragging her into a federal indictment. Vivian kept her hands pressed tightly over her ears, frantically shaking her head, trying to block out the undeniable proof of her family's complete criminal depravity. She had spent her entire life judging other people at her megachurch, entirely blind to the fact that she had raised a ruthless, calculated monster. Marcus remained frozen on the floor, his eyes locked onto the black binder resting in the hands of the federal agent. His custom-tailored suit felt like a suffocating straitjacket. He knew the insurance fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. He knew I had audited his entire life. The heavy, terrifying silence was suddenly broken by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the back of the expansive boardroom. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped out from behind a row of frosted glass cubicles. It was the chief executive officer of the prominent Atlanta investment firm where Marcus used to work. His face was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. He carried the weight of a man whose entire corporate legacy had nearly been destroyed by the greedy coward kneeling on the floor. He walked past the armed federal agents and stopped directly in front of Marcus. He looked down at his former vice president with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "You stole $5 million from my top-tier clients, Marcus," the CEO stated, his voice resonating with lethal authority. "You forged vendor invoices and funneled their hard-earned capital into your pathetic offshore shell companies to fund your luxury vacation. The authorities have seized everything. You are looking at 30 years in federal prison." The chief executive officer stepped back, allowing the gravity of his words to crush whatever fragile defiance Marcus had left. Marcus slumped forward on his hands and knees, his forehead pressing against the sterile commercial carpeting. He could not form a single cohesive sentence. His mind was violently short-circuiting under the sheer magnitude of his total ruin. The arrogant investment executive who had confidently planned my murder just 74 days ago was now reduced to a trembling, pathetic shell of a man. With Marcus and Bradley completely neutralized by the federal authorities, my gaze shifted slowly toward the two remaining architects of my suffering. Vivian and Tasha were huddled tightly together near the frosted glass partitions, their expensive designer clothes hanging awkwardly off their shivering frames. Their entire world of unearned privilege and fake social superiority had just been obliterated in a matter of minutes. Vivian could no longer hide behind her son. The terrifying reality of the federal agents and the Internal Revenue Service investigator standing in the room finally shattered her delusional pride. She let out a loud, pathetic wail and fell heavily to her knees. She crawled across the carpet toward the polished glass conference table, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. She clasped her hands together in a desperate theatrical prayer. "Serena, please!" Vivian sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly across the massive boardroom. "You have to stop this right now. We are family in the eyes of the Lord. You cannot send your own husband and his family to federal prison. The Bible tells us to forgive those who trespass against us. You must show us mercy. I am begging you as a woman of faith." I looked down at the woman who had openly mocked my illness on a stolen luxury yacht just weeks ago. She was invoking the concept of divine forgiveness only because her back was pressed firmly against a concrete wall. I felt absolutely zero pity for her. "You are incredibly bold to speak about faith, Vivian," I said, my voice echoing with icy calm. "You spent years preaching from the front pews of your megachurch, judging everyone around you, while pretending to be a paragon of religious virtue. But real faith requires genuine accountability. You did not think about the Lord when you packed your bags and left me to die in a sweltering house." I picked up the silver remote resting on the glass table. I aimed it directly at the massive digital presentation screen behind me and clicked a single button. The screen instantly switched from Bradley and his fraudulent offshore bank ledgers to a live broadcast of a prominent Atlanta news station. The volume swelled through the commercial speakers, filling the room with the crisp, urgent voice of a local news anchor. The camera displayed a live aerial helicopter shot of Vivian's beloved Buckhead megachurch. A crowd of angry parishioners and local reporters were swarming the front steps. The news anchor delivered the breaking story with relentless clarity. A massive, glaring red headline flashed across the bottom third of the massive screen. It read, "Buckhead Church Matriarch Embezzles Tithes for Monaco Yacht Trip." Vivian gasped in sheer horror, her hands flying to her open mouth. She stared at the high-definition screen as the news anchor detailed exactly how the church charity fund had been violently drained to finance a luxury vacation in the French Riviera. The broadcast even displayed a short clip of Vivian's own arrogant social media livestream, showing her drinking sparkling wine on the yacht, while boasting about her divine blessings. Her entire congregation was currently watching her commit absolute financial heresy on local television. "You have completely ruined me," Vivian wailed, dropping her head into her trembling hands. "My reputation is totally destroyed. I can never show my face in Atlanta again." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat against the cool glass table. I looked directly into her terrified, weeping eyes. "The Lord might forgive you, Vivian." I smiled, offering her a cold, unforgiving look. "But the Atlanta District Attorney will not. You are facing severe state charges for charity fraud and major tax evasion." The Internal Revenue Service investigator stepped forward, holding a thick manila folder. She stood directly over Vivian, officially informing her that her assets would be seized, pending a massive criminal tax audit. Vivian collapsed entirely, curling into a tight, miserable ball on the floor as the weight of her impending incarceration finally crushed her. Tasha watched her mother disintegrate with wide, panicked eyes. The sudden reality of her own desperate situation struck her like a physical blow. She whipped her head around, looking at the chaotic scene unfolding in the corporate boardroom. Her husband Bradley was standing in handcuffs, aggressively negotiating a plea deal with the federal agents by offering to testify against her family. Her mother was facing prison time for embezzling church funds. Her brother was about to serve 30 years for massive corporate theft. Tasha realized she had absolutely nothing left. She had no house to return to, no money to spend, and no wealthy brother to fund her entitled lifestyle. She ran over to Marcus, grabbing his wrinkled suit jacket and shaking him violently. "Marcus, do something!" Tasha screamed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You have to fix this right now. Call your lawyers. Pay them off. Do not just sit there on the floor. Tell them it is a mistake. We cannot go to jail. I cannot be poor." Marcus did not respond to his sister's frantic shaking. He did not look at the angry chief executive officer, the armed federal agents, or his sobbing mother. He simply stared blankly at me. His mind was utterly broken by the flawless execution of my vengeance. He finally understood that he had lost everything completely. He realized that his meticulous plan to murder me for financial gain had resulted in his own permanent demise. The $10 million life insurance policy was nothing but a mirage that led him directly into a federal trap. He opened his dry mouth, attempting to formulate a final excuse, but no sound escaped his throat. The towering walls of his fraudulent empire had finally crashed down upon him, burying him forever in absolute and utter disgrace. The lead federal agent stepped forward, breaking the heavy silence that had suffocated the ruined men on the floor. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The metallic clink echoed sharply against the cold glass conference table. He looked down at Marcus, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. "Marcus," the agent stated, his voice booming through the sterile corporate boardroom, You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The second agent moved swiftly toward Bradley. Bradley scrambled backward on his knees, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. No, wait. You do not understand. I am cooperating. I told you I will testify against all of them. I am an American citizen. The agent did not hesitate. He grabbed Bradley by the collar of his torn silk shirt, violently twisting him around. He slammed Bradley face first against the frosted glass partition. Bradley, you are under arrest for massive identity theft and federal wire fraud. Put your hands behind your back right now. The loud, definitive click of the steel cuffs locking around Bradley's wrists sent a fresh wave of horror rippling through Tasha. Tasha backed away, pressing her trembling body against the white commercial drywall. She watched the husband she thought would provide her a life of endless luxury weeping like a small, terrified child against the glass. She had absolutely nothing. Her brother was a criminal. Her husband was a coward. Her mother was ruined. The Internal Revenue Service investigator marched over to Vivian. Vivian was still curled on the floor, rocking back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably. The investigator dropped a heavy stack of official federal citations directly in front of Vivian's tear-stained face. Vivian, you are being officially cited for severe charity fraud, gross tax evasion, and the embezzlement of $150,000 from Buckhead Grace Cathedral. Your domestic bank accounts are permanently seized. Your properties are under federal lien. You will be receiving a formal summons for a criminal indictment hearing next week. I highly suggest you do not attempt to leave the state of Georgia. Vivian let out a long, agonizing wail. It was a deeply guttural sound of pure, unadulterated despair. The polished, arrogant matriarch who loved to strut down the church aisles in designer hats and fake diamonds was completely gone. She was now just a disgraced, broke woman facing state prison. She grabbed handfuls of the gray commercial carpeting, weeping bitterly for the elite social status she would never regain. Seeing his mother crying on the floor and hearing the finality of the Miranda rights finally caused something inside Marcus's brain to completely shatter. The paralyzing shock evaporated, instantly replaced by a blinding, psychotic rage. He looked up from the floor. His bloodshot eyes locked onto me. He saw me sitting calmly in my leather chair, untouched, wealthy, and absolutely victorious. He realized I had orchestrated every single second of his absolute humiliation. "You did this!" Marcus screamed, his voice tearing through his throat. "You ruined my entire life!" He scrambled to his feet with terrifying speed. He ignored the federal agent standing right next to him. He lunged across the open space, throwing his entire body weight toward the glass conference table. His hands reached out, his fingers curled into violent claws, desperately trying to grab my throat. "You are a monster. You are an absolute monster, Serena." I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I simply remained seated, watching his pathetic final charge. Before his dirty hands could even graze the polished glass of my desk, the lead federal agent moved with explosive, trained aggression. The agent lunged forward, hitting Marcus with a devastating full-body tackle. The sheer force of the impact lifted Marcus completely off the ground. They crashed violently onto the floor. The agent pressed his heavy knee directly into the center of Marcus's back, pinning him down with crushing force. He shoved Marcus's bruised face hard against the rough commercial carpeting. "Do not move a single muscle," the agent roared, pulling Marcus's arms violently behind his back. Marcus thrashed wildly, screaming my name, spitting angry curses into the carpet. The agent easily overpowered him. The heavy steel handcuffs snapped tightly around Marcus's wrists, locking with a sharp final click. His arms were pinned immovably behind his back. The arrogant investment executive was entirely neutralized, pinned to the floor of the house he thought he owned. "Get him up," the lead agent commanded. Two strong agents grabbed Marcus by his arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. His tailored suit was torn. His face was red and covered in thick carpet burns. He looked absolutely pathetic. They dragged him toward the automated glass doors. The second agent grabbed Bradley, who was still weeping loudly, and marched him right behind Marcus. Vivian scrambled to her feet, stumbling blindly after her arrested son. Tasha followed closely, clutching her ruined designer bags entirely stripped of her fake superiority. The automated glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. The blinding Georgia sunlight poured into the sterile lobby. A massive fleet of black federal vehicles with flashing red and blue lights waited in the newly paved commercial parking lot. The wealthy neighbors Marcus was so worried about impressing were all standing at the very edge of the commercial property lines. They were holding up their bright cell phones, actively recording the massive, humiliating spectacle for the local community pages. The flashy, arrogant family was physically hauled out of the commercial building. They were aggressively shoved into the back seats of the waiting federal vehicles in absolute, undeniable disgrace. I watched from my polished glass desk as the doors slammed. The glass doors slid shut, sealing the quiet of the boardroom. The chaotic symphony of shouting agents, weeping relatives, and clicking handcuffs faded into the humid afternoon. The flashing lights retreated down the driveway, taking the worst chapters of my existence away forever. I stood still in the center of the room. I inhaled a deep breath. The air no longer smelled like the suffocating cologne Marcus used to wear. It smelled like fresh paint, new electronics, and absolute, undeniable freedom. The immense crushing weight I had carried on my shoulders for the past 10 years simply evaporated. I was no longer the weak, submissive housewife they had all relentlessly mocked and ultimately left to die on a hardwood floor. I had meticulously orchestrated my own miraculous resurrection, and in the process, I had systematically dismantled every single pillar of their fraudulent, arrogant lives. A polite clearing of a throat broke my reflection. I turned around. The chief executive officer of the Atlanta investment firm was standing near the conference table. He had quietly stayed behind while authorities hauled his former vice president out. His stern face was softened by an expression of genuine respect. He slowly walked over to me, stopping just a few feet away. He reached out his hand. I firmly grasped it, returning his professional, confident handshake. I have worked in the high-stakes financial sector for over 30 years, the CEO stated, his voice echoing smoothly across the empty commercial space. I have employed hundreds of top-tier analysts, aggressive lawyers, and corporate security directors. I have never seen anyone execute a forensic audit with the absolute terrifying precision you displayed today. You did not just save my firm from a catastrophic federal shutdown. You completely protected the hard-earned capital of our most loyal, vulnerable clients. You did in 74 days what entire federal task forces take years to accomplish. Marcus made the fatal mistake of underestimating his opponent. I replied, releasing his hand and offering a polite, razor-sharp smile. He assumed my silence was a symptom of profound weakness. He did not understand that an auditor never speaks until the final trap is perfectly set. The CEO chuckled, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, embossed leather folder. He placed it delicately on the glass table directly in front of me. My board of directors held an emergency meeting the moment we verified your anonymous dossier, he explained, tapping the leather cover. We have a massive security vacuum to fill. We need someone who can see through the deceptive layers of modern financial fraud. We want to offer you an exclusive multi-million-dollar contract to serve as our permanent external forensic auditor. You will have absolute autonomy, your own dedicated cyber team, and a compensation package that aggressively reflects your unparalleled expertise. We need your brilliant mind on our side, Serena. I looked down at the embossed leather folder. This was the ultimate professional vindication. I had spent years hiding my elite skills to appease a deeply insecure, incredibly arrogant man who ultimately tried to murder me for a life insurance payout. I was finally stepping entirely out of the shadows. I reached out and gently rested my fingertips on the smooth leather. I accept your offer, I said, my voice radiating absolute certainty. But my firm operates on my terms and my specific auditing protocols are strictly non-negotiable. I would expect nothing less from you. The CEO smiled broadly, visibly relieved to have secured my services. He turned and walked toward the automated glass doors, pausing just before he exited the building. I look forward to our highly profitable partnership, Serena. Have a wonderful afternoon. The doors hissed shut behind him, leaving me completely alone in my new corporate dominion. I slowly walked around the massive glass table, my heels clicking sharply against the sterile gray carpeting. I stopped at the exact geographical spot where the old Persian rug used to lie. I stared down at the floor vividly, remembering the suffocating agony in my chest, the sheer terror of paralyzing illness and the cold, cruel smirk on Marcus's face as he poured my life-saving medication down the kitchen sink. He had locked me inside this very space, expecting it to become my permanent tomb. Instead, I had forcefully transformed it into the ultimate monument of his absolute destruction. I picked up my encrypted tablet and my designer handbag. I did not look back as I walked purposefully toward the grand entryway. The biometric scanner chimed a pleasant welcoming note as the heavy commercial glass doors slid wide open for me. I stepped out onto the wide concrete porch. The blistering, oppressive heat of the Georgia summer immediately enveloped me, but this time it did not feel suffocating. It felt incredibly warm, vibrant, and fiercely alive. The air smelled of hot asphalt and blooming magnolia trees. I took a deep, deeply satisfying breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, intoxicating taste of profound independence. I walked confidently down the wide concrete steps, my head held high. A sleek, polished black town car pulled smoothly into the freshly paved commercial driveway. The luxury vehicle glided to a gentle stop right in front of me. The uniformed driver promptly stepped out, his shoes crunching softly against the pavement. He offered a polite, respectful nod as he reached out and opened the heavy rear passenger door for me. I slid into the incredibly comfortable air-conditioned leather seat. The driver closed the door with a solid thud. He returned to the front seat, starting the powerful engine. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Heading to the international airport, Ms. Serena?" the driver asked. I smiled, looking at the first-class ticket on my phone. "Yes," I replied smoothly, my calm voice echoing a sense of absolute, undeniable triumph. "It is finally time I take a real European vacation."